Aloha. Aloha. Apade. Apade. Good morning. I am a settler on this island who calls this very neighborhood of Mo'ili'ili my home. I can currently trace my family roots to settlers in North America, through the modern states of Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Virginia. And before that, to the earliest days of the 18th century, to Scotland and Ireland. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Aina on which we gather. Mokupuni, Oahu, Moku of Kona, Papua'a of Waikiki, and the Ili of Kamoku is part of the larger territory recognized by the Kanaka Oiwi as their ancestral grandmother. Papahana Aumo. I recognize that Her Majesty Queen Liliuokalani, a member of our church, yielded the Hawaiian kingdom and these territories under duress and in protest to the United States to avoid the bloodshed of her people. I recognize that Hawaii remains an illegally occupied nation. I am Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Hawaii. I honor and give thanks for our founding patrons, for King Kamehameha IV and Blessed Queen Ellen. I acknowledge the trust they committed to our church in 1862 to care for their people, the Kanaka Oiwi, and for all of the children of these islands, and for our responsibility to care for creation. As the bishop of the church invited to these islands, I deeply regret that we have not always fulfilled our responsibility. We have often failed, and we turn a blind eye to those around us. For those things which we as the church and as individual Episcopalians have done, and the many, many more things we have left undone that have contributed to the harm inflicted on the Kanaka Oiwi and upon these islands, I offer a lamentation. I ask for God's forgiveness. I ask the prayers of our blessed Ali'i ancestors and of you, God's people, that we will have the will and the courage to better fulfill our responsibility. Kamako Kuriana. To the people of these islands, to the people of Guam and Saipan, and to God's creation. I come to you today as bishop for the 18th time. I hope you read my dearly detailed report to the convention. I've offered thanks to many, many people, particularly to the Diocesan Support Center staff and others. So please read it. God willing, next year's annual meeting of this convention will be very different. Though I will then offer a word to the diocese at the beginning of that meeting, I will give the last word to the bishop-elect. And then in the month following, on November 14th, 2026, the 6th Bishop Diocesan will, God willing, be ordained, and I will gratefully give up ecclesiastical authority. I therefore speak to you today about two things. The discernment of God's will for us as the diocese, and the specific things that I am called to complete over the next 12 months. I am very aware that I am the only person in this room on any of our islands that has personal experience of what it means to be an Episcopal bishop. So in your e-workbook, please go to the section entitled The Examination from the Ordination of a Bishop. Saturday, March 10th, 2007, the Cathedral of St. Andrew, Honolulu. What page? 265. It's at the very end. This is a long workbook. This is the examination right from the service booklet. that the presiding bishop, Catherine Jefford Shorey, put before me before I was ordained. There will be times I'm going to ask you to read some sections with me. The opening section is an introduction to the specific questions, and promises to follow. So look at page 265. Look at lines 7 to 10. Say the words with me, if you will, please. My brother, the people have chosen you and have affirmed their trust in you by acclaiming your election. A bishop in God's holy church is called to be one with the apostles and proclaiming Christ's resurrection and interpreting the gospel and to testify to Christ's sovereignty as Lord of lords and King of kings. Now you'll see that these actually are questions that come in lines 32 to 40 that support this statement. I was asked, will you be faithful in prayer and in the study of Holy Scriptures and may have the mind of Christ? I was asked, will you boldly proclaim and interpret the gospel of Christ, enlightening the minds and stirring up the conscience of your people? The bishop, I think, is first and foremost a teacher. This is the role that I have most cherished. Sadly for me, it's one that doesn't always provide enough time to do what I love. I can preach, I can do online classes, but teaching is a source of joy. I hope to have a few more opportunities with you as bishop. Maybe 1 or 2 online classes to help prepare for the transition. But please note in this the emphasis on Scripture and prayer. We live in very trying times. God's people are called to find direction in the Bible, particularly in the New Testament through the teaching of Jesus, the witness of his life, death, and resurrection, the story of that early church, maybe a story more like our times than any times in the past century. Prayer must be central, both privately and together. We need one another now more than ever. We need God. Now, I have to tell you, my prayer life was transformed during the pandemic. I began to walk 5 miles a day and to say the Jesus prayer, Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. During many, many Zoom meetings, and some of you have been on them with me, you won't see me, but I have an Orthodox prayer beads. And while I'm there, I'm saying the Jesus prayer. And I start the day with my Franciscan family, with the Franciscan prayer book. Every morning, saying prayers with the brothers and the sisters around the world. I'd like to share that with you. As we discern about the future, we must pray and listen. There should be no politicking in the church. No one should run to be bishop. You stand, you discern, you pray. We must listen closely. We must discern with those who might be called to be our bishop. It's going to be my bishop too. Do they study the Scripture? Do they pray? But maybe more importantly, each one of us, everyone in this room, must ask themselves the question, do I study the Bible? Right now, do I pray? Do I hear the voice of the challenge of the Spirit in my life? Going on, join me again. The presiding bishop explained what it means to be a bishop. Lines 12 to 15. on page 265. Let's read these lines together. You are called to guard the faith, unity, and discipline of the church, to celebrate and to provide for the administration of the sacraments of the new covenant, to ordain priests and deacons, to join in ordaining bishops, to be in all things a faithful pastor and wholesome example for the entire flock of Christ. And there were questions that came there after. As the chief priest and pastor, will you encourage and support all baptized people in their gifts and ministries, nourishing them from the riches of God's grace, pray for them without ceasing, and celebrate with them the sacraments of our redemption? And will you guard the faith, unity, and discipline of the church? When Bishop Chang was alive, and after I became bishop, he and I would have lunch every other week. Now, he also insisted that I pay for lunch. You didn't know that. But he also made a habit when people would come up to him and they would say, Bishop, he would say, no, I'm Bishop Chang. That's the bishop. Go bother him. But at one lunch, he was reflecting with me the change in relationship he had with his fellow clergy after he became bishop. Remember, he knew some of the clergy for decades. Without quoting the ordination promises, he was speaking of the phrase, chief priest and pastor, will you encourage all baptized people in their gifts and ministries. Once you become bishop, something changes. It was brought home to me by David Kennedy. David Kennedy was one of the first people to talk to me about standing to be bishop. And after I was ordained, at the reception, he came up to me and very seriously said, you are no longer Bob, you are now the bishop. He always called me bishop. So if you notice, it says, the phrase is faith, unity, and discipline of the church. It's said twice. Now the bishop is meant, and this is a hard one, to keep order. Not to be a legalist, but to be aware of the rubrics, the canons, and the policies, and that stack over there. You see, the role of the bishop is to kind of keep the container. Everyone that's been ordained has promised to follow the canons and the rules. We promised that. But we have a common life and a common prayer. It's, as the former presiding bishop used to say, we are the Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement. We have a container. Now that container sometimes needs to be stretched, and sometimes we need to talk. But we're in it together. And so the bishop must constantly consider the good of the whole church, the Anglican Communion, the Episcopal Church, the Diocese of Hawai'i, each congregation, and the clergy. And there are tense moments. You have to balance love. So being the chief priest and pastor to all means the bishop is not the pastor to pastors. You can't be the pastor to pastors all the time. Clergy, you provide continuing education, you visit them when they're in the hospital, but you can't hear their confession if you're the bishop. It also means you have to love the congregations, and you have to deal with bishops' committees, and you have to deal with wayward wardens, and you got stuff going on. So that constant mind of the whole church. if you're a bishop, you have to be thankful that Christ is the shepherd and the bishop of souls. Now, before I resign for reasons of advanced age, there are some things I do need to do. I know way too much about the canons. Since before I was bishop, when I was a deputy to General Convention, I have been on so many commissions, committees, and meetings about the canons. I can open up the canons in the National Church and read you lines that I wrote. It just makes me so proud. I was on the committee that helped draft the second version of the clergy disciplinary canons. That's not going to be true, likely, for the next person elected bishop. So I have some work to do. Wayne has decided he wants to go and retire in Portugal. So we're going to have to make arrangements for chancellor transition. I need to be sure that we have a church attorney, that's a technical term, that's actually about clergy discipline. I have some training to do. And I also realized, looking around this room, I've ordained a lot of the clergy in this room. I've probably ordained more clergy than any bishop since Bishop Kennedy. And he had a bit longer to go. I mean, he went from 44 to 69. But we have the transitions there as well. So I'll ask the COM to help tighten things up, to help clean things, to help hold things together. I will not admit any more nominees for ordination after December 1st. That way we can prepare. I also probably will not receive anyone, unless they're called to be rector or vicar, canonically receive them to the diocese. I'll license those clergy who are here for a short time, but not folk who've moved here. God had just put some pauses on some things. Now you know that a bishop wears many hats, other than that really dumb-looking pointy one. And I don't know, but my fellow bishops seem to really like big mitres lately. They're just huge. Very strange. But a bishop is called to be a liturgist, a teacher, a preacher, the CEO, yes, the CEO of a corporation, a crisis counselor, a community organizer, a conflict manager, an arbiter, a board member, a personal advisor, a cheerleader. But each bishop brings their own gifts. You're not, no bishop, no priest, none of us are everything. Now, despite the Godfather presence, most recently, I have truly felt like the grandpa of this diocese. I am grateful to have walked with you, and I do love you. Now, the presiding bishop concluded with words in the opening introduction, lines 17 to 20. Please say them with me. With your fellow bishops, you will share in the leadership of the church throughout the world. Your heritage is faith of patriarchs, prophets, apostles, and martyrs, and those of every generation who are loyal to God and hope. Your joy will be to follow him who came, not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. And then there were questions that followed. Will you share with your fellow bishops in the government of the whole church? Will you sustain your fellow presbyters and take counsel with them? Will you guide and be strengthened, that will strengthen the deacons and others who minister in the church? And will you be merciful to all and show compassion to the poor and strangers? than those who have no helper. Notice that these words focus on the ministry of the bishop in governance, leadership, and the world. Despite what some folk think, the Episcopal Church is not autocratic. The bishop has defined roles and relationships. As our Chancellor Emeritus Jack Lockridge used to say, we are a constitutional theocratic Republican theocracy. So we gather like this. And today we will vote, sometimes clergy and lay in two different orders because we've got some things to do that you have to do that. Sometimes we vote together. But most of the decisions are made together. Now we have to be aware that the bishop is part of the community and the world. My responses to you have largely been through pastoral letters, support of congregations and local ministries, like a cup of cold water, taking the heat when clergy take stands and people complain, and they do complain. Sometimes from all around the world, it's really strange. Sometimes they're not even Episcopalians. Directly contacting elected officials. But some of you will remember during the marriage equality debates, I wrote each of the members of the legislature individually. Bishop Silva of the Roman Catholic Diocese published a letter. And then some member of the legislature kind of slipped my letter to some reporter. I didn't mean it to be dueling letters. But it happened. And we had lunch the next day. That was interesting. But I take seriously that not all of God's people, not every Episcopalian, will agree about specific issues. And we can do so faithfully. The bishop must provide loving clarity about the gospel and the teaching of the church, but also know there are those of us in our ohana who disagree. There's no need for self-righteousness, even in disagreement. So looking ahead, we must continue to support Ho'inipono, the Ministry of the Racial Reconciliation Task Force, and use the curriculum. Likewise, the Ministry of Paku'o'olo, the Creation Care Ministry that we've celebrated these last 2 days, are essential to our common life. But we as a diocese have a special responsibility to keep the broader Episcopal Church informed about Asia and Oceania.
Yes.
This has been brought home to me in recent cuts in the staff of the presiding bishop's office. They've been told they can't travel as much. And so where before the Episcopal Church had an Asia officer who was interacting with the churches in Asia and Oceania, it's been combined with the Africa office now. So one person is supposed to handle all of our relationships with all of Africa and all of Asia. I've gotten more calls about that recently than you can imagine. We are in Oceania. We are not part of North America.
Thank you, Leo.
We have blood ties, family ties throughout Oceania and in the Philippines and in Asia.
Leo.
We are unique. We are responsible to keep the Episcopal Church informed. Now, I hope we can do that through strengthening and formalizing in the next couple of months our relationship with the Iglesia Filipina Impentante Diocese of Batak and the Episcopal Church in the Philippines Diocese of the Northern Philippines. I am also keen that we continue to build the relationship with the Diocese of Polynesia. And I will, in fact, over Thanksgiving, be in Tonga. Now, you got to remember, Bishop Willis, after spending 30 years in the Kingdom of Hawaii, refused to recognize the illegal overthrow. And when the United States did whatever it did, he left. He went to Tonga without permission. It really upset a lot of folk because the missionary societies had already carved up Polynesia and the Methodists got Tonga. But he went anyway because a member of the royal family was mad at another part of the royal family. It's part of our stories. And then he spent another 20 years in Tonga. And I would be there for the anniversary of St. Andrew's School, which is named after St. Andrew's Cathedral and St. Andrew's Priory School. Tonga is part of our family. The Bishop of Hawaii serves a pivotal role in the Episcopal Church looking across the Pacific. We have particular responsibility. This is the largest geographic diocese in the Anglican community. When you go from Guam to Kauai, there's not a lot to stop in between, but we have a responsibility. So we must be the eyes, the ears, the feet, and the hands of the Episcopal Church in Oceania. We need to look to Oceania and Asia, not just to North America, and certainly not to Europe and the United Kingdom. In the ordination, the prayer of consecration is said after the creed and the singing of the Veni Creator. The creed is our historic faith. And then we call down the Holy Spirit. If you were there at my ordination, you will remember the Iolani School Halal danced around me while the Veni Creator was sung in English, in Latin, and in Olelo, Hawaii. And then a prayer is said. So if you look on page 267, lines 124 to 151, a prayer is said. It was the prayer said when bishops laid hands on. With your permission, I'm going to come among you. I'd like you to stand. Annalise is going to say the prayer with me. I'm going to ask you to say it over me.